Vikings, let's win the game.
3 realistic trades could still reshape the Vikings' depth chart before training camp, but one much bigger proposal would bring an absolute monster to Minnesota's defensive front. At the same time, a Vikings legend believes Kyler Murray offers something this offense has been missing for years, while Blake Cashman is challenging NFL owners over a controversy the World Cup just dragged back into the spotlight. Each one raises a major question about where this team is headed, and the answers could reach far beyond training camp. The Vikings' training camp roster may look practically finished, but great teams never stop searching for smaller moves that can create a meaningful advantage. With new general manager Nolan Teasley now running the front office after learning under John Schneider in Seattle, Minnesota could be more aggressive around the margins than we have seen in recent years. Teasley missed most of the major offseason movement, but 3 realistic trades could still be explored before the end of July. The first would send a 2027 7th-round pick to Atlanta for edge rusher Bralen Trice. Dallas Turner and Andrew Van Ginkel give Minnesota a solid starting pair, but the depth behind them is where the concern begins. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins is transitioning outside, while Bo Richter has been more of a special teams contributor than someone the Vikings would necessarily want replacing an injured starter. Trice, a 3rd-round pick in 2024, has not appeared in a regular season game after tearing his ACL during his first preseason contest and aggravating the injury while attempting to return last season. Atlanta has since invested heavily at the position, drafting Jalon Walker and James Pierce Jr. in the 1st round in 2025. Pierce, however, could face a lengthy suspension following a February domestic dispute, which may convince Atlanta to keep Trice around. But if he becomes available, Minnesota would be buying low on a 25-year-old developmental pass rusher who recorded 18 sacks over 3 seasons at Washington. The second possibility is Giants cornerback Deonte Banks for a 6th or 7th round pick in 2027. New York selected Banks' 1 spot after Minnesota drafted Jordan Addison in 2023, and Dane Brugler once projected Banks to the Vikings after he allowed only 26 receptions in 13 games during his final season at Maryland. His NFL career, unfortunately, has gone in the opposite direction. Over 3 seasons, Banks has surrendered 128 receptions for 1,667 yards and 14 touchdowns, with 2 interceptions, 15 pass breakups, and 21 penalties, 8 of which were declined, across 197 targets according to PFF. The Giants declined his 5th-year option after John Harbaugh arrived, but Minnesota could let Brian Flores attempt to revive the talented 6'2", 205-pound former first-round pick. The final name is Chiefs cornerback Kristian Fulton. Byron Murphy Jr. and Isaiah Rodgers are back, but James Pierre currently occupies a starting outside spot on a shaky depth chart. Fulton allowed 43 catches for 491 yards with 1 interception and 5 pass breakups for the Chargers in 2024, although he also surrendered 6 touchdowns and committed 9 penalties. 4 declined on 66 targets. Kansas City then gave him a 2-year, $20 million contract, but injuries limited him to 208 snaps last season. The Chiefs have since drafted Mansour Delane, promoted Noel Williams, and signed Kader Coho. Fulton's $13 million cap hit makes a trade complicated, so Minnesota could wait for Kansas City to release him and save $5 million. Still, if the Vikings dislike what they see at cornerback in camp, Fulton could provide veteran insurance for the price of a conditional 7th-round pick. None of these trades would dominate the headlines, but each one addresses a depth chart concern that could become much more serious during the season. Those 3 trades would be calculated bets, but this next proposal lives in an entirely different financial and competitive universe. Winston Wilcox of FanSided recently included the Vikings among the teams that could realistically trade for Eagles defensive tackle Jalen Carter. Minnesota has to survive in a division featuring Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, and Jared Goff, so making those quarterbacks uncomfortable will be essential. The Vikings traded Jonathan Greenard away this offseason and are counting on Dallas Turner to replace his production on the edge, but Carter would give Brian Flores the ability to create pressure directly through the middle. Wilcox initially mentioned J.J. McCarthy as someone who could potentially be included in a package, but he also explained why that idea does not make much sense. Philadelphia already has Jalen Hurts under contract without a potential exit until 2028, and Minnesota does not have many expendable players who could be traded without opening a significant hole elsewhere. The Vikings also lack receiver depth, meaning a realistic offer would probably have to be built around substantial draft capital. That price would be painful, particularly because Carter's most recent season was not completely dominant. He played 640 defensive snaps and received a 60.0 overall defensive grade from PFF, producing 41 pressures, 3 sacks, 30 hurries, and 8 quarterback hits. Against the run, he registered 18 solo tackles. Those numbers do not tell the entire story of his talent, however. Carter is still capable of becoming a disruptive force who changes how opposing offenses protect their quarterbacks, and that kind of interior presence is extremely difficult to find. Minnesota already chose the younger route on the defensive line after releasing Javon Hargrave and trading Jonathan Allen to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Vikings drafted Dominique Orange and Caleb Banks with the expectation that they could become the future of the position. Adding Carter might temporarily block those rookies, but it could also transform a developmental defensive front into a unit capable of helping Minnesota contend immediately. That leaves Nolan Teasley with a difficult question if Carter truly becomes available. Protect the draft capital and trust the young players, or sacrifice future resources for a potential defensive star. Minnesota also has another path if it wants help without trading anything. CBS Sports' Brian DiArdo identified veteran Haason Reddick as a possible fit. Reddick averaged nearly 13 sacks per season from 2020 through 2023, but he has produced only 3.5 combined sacks over the past 2 seasons. In 2025, while dealing with several injuries, he still generated 34 pressures despite recording only 2.5 sacks. Across 571 defensive snaps for Tampa Bay last season, Reddick earned a 57.2 PFF grade and finished with 34 pressures, 3 sacks, 29 hurries, 2 quarterback hits, and 1 forced fumble. He also recorded 24 solo tackles against the run. Carter would be the expensive swing with long-term consequences. Reddick would be the veteran gamble that allows Minnesota to preserve its draft capital. While Minnesota considers how to pressure opposing quarterbacks, Cris Carter believes the Vikings have finally acquired a quarterback who can punish defenses with his legs. The franchise legend spoke highly of Kyler Murray during a television appearance earlier this week, and Carter did not hesitate when discussing the quarterback competition. He believes Murray will be the starter, but his larger point centered on the missing ingredient Murray brings to Kevin O'Connell's offense. When a third down play collapses and every receiver is covered, Murray can escape the pocket and run for the first down. Carter sees that ability as something Minnesota has not possessed in years, especially in an NFL where so many of the top quarterbacks are dangerous dual threats. Murray arrived in March on a 1-year, $1.3 million contract after spending 7 seasons as Arizona's franchise quarterback. During his time with the Cardinals, he made 3 starts against Minnesota and finished 1-2, passing for 986 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Now, the same quarterback who once tried to escape the Vikings' defense will be asked to create that kind of pressure for their offense. The rushing numbers explain Carter's excitement. 4 of Murray's seasons would rank among the 6 highest rushing totals by a Vikings quarterback over the past 20 years. His 819 rushing yards in 2020 would lead that entire list. His 572 yards in 2024 would rank 3rd. His 544 yards as a rookie in 2019 would rank 4th. And his 423 yards in 2021 would rank 6th. Over 7 NFL seasons, Murray has carried the ball 532 times for 3,186 yards and 32 touchdowns. His best rushing season came in 2020 when he gained 819 yards and scored a career-high 11 touchdowns on the ground. That November, he produced the best rushing performance of his career by running for 160 yards against Miami. It was his only 100-yard rushing game that season, but he also recorded 2 games with multiple rushing touchdowns, including one against Buffalo's formidable defense in Week 10. None of this guarantees that Minnesota is getting the 2020 version of Murray. His overall production has declined during the past couple of seasons, and he still has to prove that he can play at a high level consistently. But a new environment and Kevin O'Connell's system may give him the reset he needs. The Vikings already have dangerous playmakers, and Murray's ability to create after the original play breaks down could force defenses to account for a threat Minnesota has lacked for years. His presence would also give the organization more time with J.J. McCarthy. Instead of rushing McCarthy back or forcing him into the lineup following the meniscus tear he suffered in 2024, the Vikings can let him continue developing behind an experienced veteran. Even if Murray is only in Minnesota for 1 season, that breathing room could be valuable by itself. But if O'Connell can combine Murray's mobility with the weapons already on this offense, Cris Carter may be right. This could become much more than a simple insurance policy at quarterback. The World Cup just gave NFL players new evidence in a fight that has been going on for years, and Vikings linebacker Blake Cashman is adding his voice to the pressure. Every one of the 11 NFL stadiums that hosted a World Cup match this summer installed natural grass at FIFA's request. Players are now asking an obvious question. If owners can provide grass for an international soccer tournament, why can't they provide it permanently for NFL players? Cashman joined other players using the hashtag worth the cost to demand a permanent transition to natural grass. US Bank Stadium remains one of 14 NFL venues that use artificial turf, making this issue directly relevant to the Vikings. Cashman was joined by other NFC North players, including Bears quarterback Caleb Williams and Packers linebacker Zaire Franklin. Concerns over Minnesota's playing surface are not new. The Vikings replaced the turf at US Bank Stadium in 2023 with what was presented as a superior variety, but players have continued to push for natural grass. The NFLPA argued that the World Cup installations prove this is no longer a question of whether owners possess the technology, expertise, or money required to make the change. From the union's perspective, owners chose to meet a higher standard for soccer players and a global event while refusing to make the same investment for the NFL players who regularly compete in those stadiums and help generate the revenue supporting them. The Vikings' position is that the situation at US Bank Stadium is not so simple. Chief Business Administration Officer Steve Poppin said the venue was constructed as a multi-purpose facility and designed around an artificial surface. He added that the building does not currently have the ability to grow grass. But after watching temporary natural fields installed across NFL venues for the World Cup, players are becoming less willing to accept the word impossible. For Cashman and those supporting the campaign, the issue ultimately comes down to whether ownership is willing to prioritize the playing surface players overwhelmingly prefer. And while one Vikings defender is asking ownership to make a major decision, another still has a deeply personal decision of his own to make. Haason Smith has not announced whether he will play in 2026. Alec Lewis of The Athletic said earlier this week that Smith's future remains completely up in the air and that a return cannot be ruled out. According to Lewis, there is no clear timeline. The decision will depend on how Smith's body feels, where his mind is, and whether he still wants to continue playing. Minnesota appears willing to give him the space and time necessary to reach that conclusion without forcing a deadline. That approach is understandable for a player who has meant so much to this franchise, but training camp is approaching, and the secondary will eventually need clarity. If Smith does not return, Minnesota will likely rely on some combination of Theo Jackson, Jay Ward, and rookie Jacoby Thomas. None of them can simply replace everything Smith brings through experience, communication, and familiarity with the defense, and his absence could force younger players into larger roles. The Vikings may be giving Smith a blank canvas, but the entire Purple Faithful is still waiting to see what Haason Smith ultimately decides to paint on it. Minnesota still has several ways to improve before the season begins, from inexpensive depth trades to the almost unimaginable possibility of pursuing Jalen Carter. Kyler Murray could introduce an entirely different dimension to Kevin O'Connell's offense, while Blake Cashman and Haason Smith are facing very different decisions that could affect this team well beyond training camp. Now I want your call. Which of these stories matters most for the Vikings in 2026? Leave your answer below, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay tuned. SKOL Vikings, let's go!